Nuno Capaz, portugués, miembro de la Comisión de Disuasión creada por el Gobierno de Portugal. Esta comisión fue creada para aplicar las leyes que fueron aprobadas en el año 2000 para descriminalizar el uso de las drogas. Es miembro del equipo interdisciplinario que evalúa a los adictos a las drogas. También actúa como intermediario con delegaciones internacionales con el fin de compartir información de investigaciones y aportar información sobre las políticas de drogas en Portugal.
Hola, buenas tardes. Primeramente gustaría de agradecer a México Unido contra la Delincuencia por me haber invitado a venir aquí y darle los parabéns por una conferencia muy buena que has organizado. Ahora, I will change to English, hope you don't mind, but I have to ensure that I don't make a fool out of myself, please. So I'm here to explain how we changed the law in 2001 and what we did, what led us to get there and what we did to change our drug policy in Portugal. So I will start with a brief history of what we had in Portugal. Prior to 2001, well, we had one of the highest levels of relative poverty in the European country. We still are. We haven't managed to figure that one out. We had a high level of imprisonment for Eastern European standards, which is quite low if you compare us with the United States or any other country. So, and historically, we had low levels of illicit drug use. That's because we had a right-wing dictatorship for around 50 years. So our country was pretty much closed in on itself. So drugs would not get in and people would not get out. Only a very few people were allowed to go abroad and eventually try some drugs, but it was very difficult to get them inside Portugal. There was some local produced substance, of course, like cannabis, but it was a very residual percentage of the population that had access to them. Well, after the revolution in '74, we had a very fast and not so well prepared open to the outside world, which led to a huge invasion of different substances from different countries. And we were not really prepared to that. So we started out using cannabis and hashish from Africa and North Africa. And very fast we moved into heroin, and people were not really aware of the difference between one another. So by the 90s, we had a huge epidemics of heroin usage, especially injected heroin usage, with all the HIV epidemics associated with that. Like you can see it there, we had an increase of 57% in drug-related deaths from 97 to 99. That's just 2 years. And that's what really led the government to change the drug policy in Portugal. Actually, there was a Eurobarometer study by that time that showed that drug issues or drug consumption was the major concern of the Portuguese society by then. Well, what the government decided to do in terms of policy development was they decided to put together this group of wise men, experts, independent experts from different areas to make recommendations about what should be the drug policy that Portugal should undertake by 1999 and 2001. Well, there was a lot of suggestions from this expert group, and one of the originalities of our politicians by then, and quite frankly for me, it's one of the reasons I think our policy actually works, is that the government just decided to take all of those recommendations and pass them into law. They didn't add any or almost any electoral concerns. They didn't cherry pick the nice looking ones for the next election. They just decided, okay, if these guys are the experts, and this was actually one of the arguments that they used while passing the laws in Parliament, was they just said, okay, if these guys are the experts, we are not going to say that they are wrong and do other things that they don't suggest us to do. So we had a clear emphasis on social solidarity. Drug users should be seen as ill and not as criminals. And to enforce a lot of the measures that were proposed by this group of wise men, we had to actually decriminalize all the possession of all drugs for personal usage. We had a chart that quantifies what's considered for 10 days usage. That's normally one of the questions that I'm asked in these types of presentation. And clearly it's merely an indicative one. It doesn't actually mean that you are going to use that drug, or you can actually have more and it's for personal usage, but basically it's for the policeman, when catches someone in possession of any illegal substance, for the policeman to know where to send the procedure to, either to a court of law as a crime or to these dissuasion commissions that were created specifically to apply this law. And by the way, that's where I work, in the Dissuasion Commission of Lisboa. And another of the recommendations, and it's been referred, especially today, by a lot of the speakers, was the expansion in treatment. Not only the methadone maintenance treatment like I have shown here in this slide, but also the accessibility in terms of payment. Actually, now in Portugal, if you are a drug addict and you want to undergo treatment, you can actually do it for free. The state pays up ahead 80% of the treatment, and if you can prove that you don't have money to pay for the rest, the remaining 20%, the state actually pays for it. And it's still cheaper than send people to jail. It might not work, but at least we know that in jail it won't work at all. At least at treatment they have a chance of doing so. So, some previous considerations. Decriminalization, it's different from liberalization or legalization. In Portugal, it's still illegal to use drugs. If you are caught in the street with any amount of substance, that substance will be apprehended to you. The difference is that we do not open a criminal procedure. And if it's for personal usage, you do not go into the judicial system or the criminal system. The drug addict is seen as a sick person and not as a criminal. So the objectives from the law that we passed in 2000 was to discourage drug use, to promote social integration of the offender, to motivate and guide the drug addicts toward treatment, to promote health in general, to identify situations of non-addiction that need specific follow-up, and to have an early intervention among drug users, to inform and make offenders aware of the risks associated with drug use and abuse. Well, to do all these objectives, the Portuguese government decided that the criminal justice was not the best way to do it. I know that there are some judges in the House. Some of them I already knew before this meeting. Some of them I met this meeting. And please don't be offended by it. But normally, a court, by definition, tends to be a coercive structure. And people normally, drug users tend not to work very well with coercive structures. Most of them has authority issues, and to have someone impose something to you might not be the best way to do it with drug users. So the government decided to, like I said earlier on, decided to remove the drug users from the criminal system and from the judicial system. And to do so, they had to create these dissuasion commissions of drug addiction that were created specifically to apply this law. We are a part of the Ministry of Health. We do have a lawyer working there because there's still some law issues involved with this type of procedure. Like I say, we are an administrative authority with power to apply sanctions, so there is a judicial component there, but it's not clearly the most important one. Like I said, we are part of the Ministry of Health, and we have Portugal is a very small country, and we are divided in 18 districts and 2 autonomous regions that are the islands, and each of them has a dissuasion commission. We are responsible for the people living in that district, so it doesn't really matter where you are caught, it matters where do you live. And why is that? Because of the follow-up work. Like I said earlier on, one of the objectives is to eventually identify situations that might need some follow-up work. And if people are living further away from the Dissuasion Commission, it won't work. So what we do, a big part of the job at these commissions is to clearly identify if the user that is presented to us should be considered as a drug addict or a recreational or occasional user. The sanctions that we can apply are actually different from one another. For example, we cannot apply financial fines to drug addicts because the lawmaker thought that, okay, if you are a drug addict, you are probably doing some illegal stuff to get the money to buy for the drugs. So there's really no point in applying a financial fine to someone who is already doing some illegal stuff to get money, because otherwise they would be doing some more illegal stuff. So the commissions are constituted by 3 members. It's a collegial administrative authority where we have to decide in a group what decision to make in terms of that person. On purpose, the people chosen to head these dissuasion commissions are from different backgrounds. For example, the one that I work, have a sociologist, that's me. We have a psychologist, and we have a lawyer. So by that, we managed to get 3 different point of views from the same person. We also have, and that's one of the big differences between our system and the drug court system, is that we have a multidisciplinary team of psychologists, social workers, lawyers, administrative workers, medical doctors that work with us to help us make that decision if that person should be considered a drug addict or a recreational user, and eventually take care of all the follow-up work if needed, of course. Like I said, like you can see down there, we have to make the previous evaluation that support the decision. They have to motivate the offender to undergo treatment if necessary, and they have to guarantee the function of the network. We tend to work, we do a lot of networking. We do not do treatment, we do not do counseling, we eventually do referral jobs. So what we have to do is, of course, all the countries more or less already have a network established of different associations, NGOs, state departments that work in this area, but sometimes the communication between them is very difficult and normally very slow. What we try to do is we try to guarantee that that network works in time. For example, if we have a drug addict that voluntarily wants to go to treatment, we can actually refer them to a treatment center in the same day. So with drug addicts, you can actually take your chances when you have them. Because if you say to a guy, okay, you can go there 15 days from now, it won't work. Because he will not stop using drugs for those 15 days until he starts treatment. So if we can manage the network to work in a fast way, we normally tend to be able to grab people with that. Well, how the procedure works in reality. I know this is a very ugly slide and people normally don't tend to be able to read it very easily, but the procedure is quite simple, and let me just explain it to you. Well, it all starts with the police authority up there. When a person is found in the possession of using drugs, the police files an occurrence report. They are not arrested. They are not given a criminal record because of that. They are just identified, and then they are notified to be presented at the dissuasion commission of their residential area in 72 hours. Normally, they do it the next day. The 72 hours is for the person who is caught on a Friday night. He gets referred there in the Monday morning. So, at the commission, we make a psychological and social evaluation. We hear the offender, and then we make the decision. This is all made in the same day. Normally, the procedure takes, in the commission, it takes around 2 to 3 hours. We have a preliminary interview from our psychologists or our social workers that eventually try to get to know better that person. And what we found out in our job in these last 10 years is that a huge majority, and that's also been said here today and yesterday, a huge majority of drug users do not have a problem with drug using. It's pretty much like alcohol. I'm guessing that almost everybody here in this room drinks alcohol once in a while, but a very few percentage should be considered alcoholics, right? With drug using, it's pretty much the same thing. We have a lot of people who use drugs just because they like them. They do not have a problem with it. Of course, we have persons who might be in the way of developing an issue with drug using. We might have persons who already have an issue with drug using, but the large majority do not have a problem with it. What we try to identify in that psychological or social evaluation is if that person has some other issues that in conjunction with drug using might develop a drug problem. And if we can address those other issues, we try to do so to eventually prevent the drug problem to get worse. An example, if a youngster is out of school and out of job, he will probably spend the whole day in a park with his friends. He will be able to smoke 10 to 15 joints a day easily. If we can put him in a formation course, it will reduce the amount of drugs that they use radically, because he simply will not have time to do it. He will eventually do 2 or 3 in the evening, or if we can get him to find a job, the same thing. We will reduce dramatically the amount of drugs that they are using. So like I said, we have to establish the difference between addicts and non-addicts. By that, we do the psychological, psychosocial situation. And the prior record, the antecedentes, it's very important for us because the law clearly states that if we have a drug user that should not be considered an addict in front of us, in the first-time offense, we have to suspend the procedure. We do not apply any sanctions on first-time offenses. The objective is to work as a warning. We inform the people, we pass the right information about the risks and consequences of drug using. We try to work as a second-stage prevention unit. We are not preventing people from using drugs, because that's the reason they were presented to our Dissuasion Commission, but we try to prevent them from developing a problem with their drug using. The penalties are normally applied or enforced by the government. Well, here are some of the characteristics of the law. The 72-hour limit is very important because one of the reasons that we decided to change this approach was because our judicial system, our court system, tends to be very slow. Things tend to take too long to solve in court. The first time you get heard by a judge, it's like 2 or 3 months after you were caught. And with drug addicts, that's not the best approach to deal with their problems. If you don't give them answers right away, you will just lose their attention. So the decision also has to be made in a 35-day period. We normally do it in a much shorter way. We use the 35 limit. Well, it says that it should be concluded. We do not have any obligation in doing so, but normally that's the timetable that we define to close the procedure, so it doesn't take too long. Of course, we can go back to it and eventually change the decision or do some more motivational work, but that's very rare. And it's also always possible. We can apply sanctions to people and then we can revoke them. So if a person, for example, if we have a drug addict that does not voluntarily wants to undergo treatment, which allows us to suspend the procedure and not apply a sanction, because that's the objective with the drug addicts, we can apply sanctions to them. If eventually, in the meantime, he starts to undergo to a treatment center, we can come back and revoke that sanction and suspend the procedure so we do not apply a sanction to them. Like we normally say, we are not there to try and arrange more problems to drug users. Normally when they go there is because they tend to have some sort of problem. Big, small, very big, or very small, but if not, they would not be using illegal substance and they would not be referred to the Dissuasion Commission. So what we try to do is we try to give them solutions to solve their problems. Well, the sanctions that we can apply are pretty much the same to the driving offenses or the parking offenses. There's a huge list there. I will just refer the 3. Actually, there's 2 slides of sanctions, but we're not that tough with them. Don't worry about it. We apply 3 of them, which is the financial fine, the community service, or the regular presentations. The regular presentations, it's one of the sanctions, one of the penalties that we use a lot in our judicial system, in our court system, but normally the courts tend to apply that sanction, that regular presentation at the police station, basically to check if that person is not running away or is not doing anything wrong. We try to avoid doing it at the police station because we don't think there's a point on sending drug users to police stations. So we try to make those regular presentations to youth associations, health centers, formation centers, employment centers, something that eventually might have a positive influence in that person's life. Well, when we apply these sanctions, the legal obligation that that person has is to go there and sign the paper. That's pretty much it. Hopefully, they will take that opportunity and eventually try to solve some other issues apart from their drug using. Well, just to finish, we also have this central support department, which is also part of the Ministry of Health that supports the function of the commissions, because the law was new when it was passed in 2001, and it was actually a very challenging time for us because we actually didn't knew what to do with it. We didn't knew how to apply it in reality, so it was quite challenging. And having 20 different commissions working over the same law can be somewhat awkward, let's put it like that. So this central support department was very important, especially to propose action and measures that intend to harmonize the procedures and to put everybody working in the same way. Well, I'm pretty much finished. Just as a conclusion, I have 40 seconds, so I'm on time. Nice. Well, for the future, people have been asking me if there is going to be any step forwards in terms of regulation, legalization of some substances. Well, I don't know. What I know is that there isn't a debate going in that direction now in Portugal. As you might know, all of the news that we get from Portugal is about the financial situation. So all the problems that we've been having is budget cuttings, which has also been affecting our dissuasion commissions, but not in a serious way. We have to do a little more with less people, but we'll still manage to do our job. Hope you have some questions for me afterwards. And again, thank you very much for having me.
Ya les pasé las preguntas para que las fueran ustedes analizando y nos den sus comentarios. Una pregunta que creo que a lo mejor está en boca de varios, y aquí me va a traicionar mi vocación como abogado, es que a la hora de estudiar los casos, particularmente Portugal y Holanda, nos llama mucho la atención este problema de la puerta trasera. Hay una especie de dicotomía en la desregulación que se está haciendo, o la regulación propiamente de la venta de drogas, en la cual en cierto lugar se pueden consumir y sin embargo la forma en que las drogas llegan a ese lugar es de índole ilegal. Entonces creo que para los que hemos estudiado eso y particularmente para los que no lo han podido revisar sería interesante sus palabras que expliquen cómo funciona algo que en un lugar es legal y sin embargo el suministro es ilegal. A lo mejor nos pueden explicar eso y pasar a contestar las preguntas que ustedes tienen. Tenemos más o menos 20 minutos, entonces pueden contestar eso y después quizá usar 5 minutos cada uno para contestar preguntas o dar sus comentarios finales. Gracias.
In terms of Portugal, that question doesn't apply because trafficking, providing, selling, lending, giving any illegal substance to anyone is always considered a crime. What it's not considered a crime is the possession for personal usage. If I have a joint in my hand and I give it to him, I'm committing a crime. If I'm just smoking myself, it's not okay because it's still illegal, but it's not a crime.
Okay. La pregunta seguiría siendo ¿cómo conseguiste la sustancia?
Well, you did it because someone committed a crime and sold it to you. Well, I'm not sure if I did a very good job according to the amount of questions that I asked, so I'm sorry. But if I won't be answering all of them because some of them I think are a little tricky and it will take just too long. So if I didn't answer your question, please feel free to ask me outside. I will gladly try to explain to you. Well, how many people do each commission takes care of? I can only speak for the, well, in general, we take care of around 8,000 to 10,000 procedures a year. More important than the number is to say that there are more people now being referred to these dissuasion commissions than they were before to a court of law, which is important because the second question is, did it raise the consumption of young population? No, it didn't. The consumption stayed basically the same, except on the age range between the 14 and 17 years old, which actually went down. In my personal opinion, it's not a consequence of decriminalization. Decriminalization in itself, it's not a solution. If you decriminalize drug usage, the only thing that you are solving is the problem with the criminal record. Because apart from that, decriminalizing drug usage doesn't do that much. This number has decreased, especially the age range between 14 and 17. My opinion is because of the prevention campaigns and information campaigns that also started to shift in 2001. Well, after 11 years since the implementation of the dissuasion commissions, if I consider it to be a success, and they asked me to grade it. I'm not going to grade it. It would be too self-centered for me to grade my own job. So, but I think, yeah, we should consider it a success because especially we have to compare with what was happening before. And what was happening before was that there were a more or less de facto decriminalized system involved like pretty much everywhere. Police forces all around the world don't send the guy to court just because he was caught with a joint in his possession, right? At least not all the time. They might eventually do that, but they don't do it all the time. They still don't do it with this decriminalized model. We know of persons who are caught and police don't do anything. What was happening in Portugal is that the only users that were eventually sent to court for drug using were those who were already committing some other crimes, which normally meant that they were the hardcore users who were already committing some other crimes to get money to pay for their drug addiction, which meant that the age range of drug users that were sent to court prior to the decriminalization was between the 30 and 45 years old. What we see now at the dissuasion commissions is that the age range of persons that are notified to be presented at these dissuasion boards is much lower. We get people from 16 to 40, 45 years old. So that's what I said earlier on. We are able to do a sort of second stage prevention work with drug users, which courts normally didn't do. Well, does your system take into account that not all users are addicted or even problem users? Yes, it does. That's why one of the sanctions that we can apply, it's the sanction. Like Ethan said earlier on, we can go on and on just saying, don't do it. Person can be caught, go there, and we can just suspend the procedure if we think that there's no point in applying a sanction to that person. Eventually, we do apply some sanctions because it's still illegal, and otherwise people would feel free to do it openly. But eventually, we can do that. We can just, one of the sanctions that we can apply is the warning. We can just tell them, okay, be careful. And that's pretty much it, if we think that it's not a problem user. Well, what is the strategy to train the group of professionals in the Commission for psychological and social evaluation? The persons who work at this commission were people who had already some experience in terms of working with this type of population, either being in the treatment facilities, in the prevention campaigns, or whatever. So we tried to pick up people who had already some experience, and also we also tried to put a lot of young people because since the law was new to everybody, and we actually needed to come up with a way to make it work. So the government decided to make a mix of experienced people in different areas in terms of drug using, and new people that didn't have any sort of bad habits in terms of working with drug policies. Does the willingness of a drug addict to undergo treatment count for your strategy? Yes. We cannot send someone to treatment if they don't want to. We can eventually motivate them to undergo treatment, but we cannot demand compulsory treatment to anyone. So if the person does not want to go to treatment, we apply a sanction to them. How did the government do in terms of strategy to convince taxpayers that their money should be used to treat addicts? Well, like I said earlier on, we had a huge problem with heroin use in the 90s. At some point, we had around 1% of the population that already used heroin. Not all of them were addicts to heroin, but at least at some point they tried it. So it was very easy for everybody to know someone, to have someone in the family or a friend that used heroin or that was an addict to heroin. So, and we knew that that person, just because he was using heroin, he should not be considered a criminal. Okay, we knew that eventually he was doing some criminal activities to get money to buy for heroin, but we also knew that if we treated him for his heroin dependence, he would eventually stop doing those other criminal activities. So it was very easy for the Portuguese society to perceive drug users as eventually sick persons and not as criminal. And also because we had some colonies in Africa where especially cannabis was normal and a cultural thing to use. The older generation, especially male person, went to the war, they did it there, and they knew that it's not a big problem to do cannabis if you do it in a more or less controlled way. So for youngsters and for older generations alike, it was not very difficult to perceive drug users as sick people and not as criminals. Can I just, it's really fast. Well, as a multidisciplinary organization working in commissions, do you think that the project can be applied in Mexico independently with students supporting the project without the help of a private institution? No. Because we are, like I said earlier, we are an administrative authority, part of the Ministry of Health, empowered to apply sanctions, so you have to do it on a state level. You cannot do it privately. And being a drug consumer does not imply being fired at a job. No, if your boss doesn't know of it, basically.